It's the university of the airwaves. It's the last free space anywhere on the mainstream media. Well, it's all over. All over bar the shouting, and of course there'll be plenty of that. The great coup against Jeremy Corbyn comes to an end at midday tomorrow, when the Labour leader will be re-elected with a landslide victory. But that's only a part of the story. It's only a part of the story because it doesn't tell the implications of an internal party election in which 240,000 members were barred from voting. 240,000! 250,000 Labour members had their vote stolen from them because they were overwhelmingly likely to vote for the re-election of the Labour Party's own leader. Once upon a time, the bureaucracy, the national executive of the Labour Party, saw as its duty the defence of the elected leader of the Labour Party. Not so these days. Their task, they thought, was to try and rig this election, either to defeat Jeremy Corbyn or to so substantially reduce his majority as to facilitate the next phase of the coup against Corbyn. Well, they failed, because Corbyn tomorrow will be re-elected with an even larger majority than he scored last time, which, given the last 12 months of sabotage, subversion, slander, endless destabilization and attack, malignant and defamatory attack, is something of a miracle. His initials are not JC for nothing. JC walks on water. He'll be walking across the Mersey, never mind the ferry, tomorrow in celebration of this magnificent victory. So the first thing I want to do tonight is to take my hat off and bow my head before Jeremy Corbyn, who has stood up to an absolutely unprecedented campaign of character assassination. And the second thing I want to do is to salute those around him for the role that they have played in defence of him, and to salute the Labour members who, in their hundreds of thousands, have re-elected their leader despite this unprecedented wave of pernicious, malignant subversion, sabotage, and slander. It is one of the political wonders of our age. And of course, those enemies within, right to the very top almost of the Labour Party, have been amply echoed by the enemies of Labour without. Here I want to make a point that some of these people seem to have forgotten. The mass media today hangs on every word spoken by Baron Kinnock of Bedvelty. Baron Kinnock of Bedvelty, when he was Neil Kinnock MP, the leader of the Labour Party, was savagely attacked from the day and hour he became the leader until the day and hour that he ceased to be. He lost 2 general elections, not least because the same media, now waiting on his every word, well, they turned him into a light bulb. They said, with the last man leaving the building, called Britain, please switch off the light. And there was the light bulb with Neil Kinnock's face in it. They endlessly replayed the fact that he couldn't keep his footing on a pebble beach. They endlessly replayed his act of hubris at the Sheffield rally when he, cowboy-like, asked everyone if they were all right. All right, he said. They mercilessly attacked him, year after year. But now all he has to do is say that he has something to malign. Jeremy Corbyn within the cameras, and the same hacks come running to write it all down and record it for the benefit of the nation. The mainstream media has been a total, absolute disgrace over the last 12 months. All pretense of anything approaching, never mind impartiality, just professional standards have been abandoned. Now, as I say, oftentimes, we can do nothing about what the privately owned media says, and quite rightly so. If you own a TV station or a radio station or a newspaper, you can say in it what you like. If you can assemble a jukebox of journalists and put your money in and get the tune that you want, well, that's up to you. Fair play to you. It's up to the rest of us to try and develop our own media. But the BBC we pay for, on pain of imprisonment. If we don't pay Laura's wages, Nick Robinson's wages, what's her name, Coburn on the Daily Politics, Joe Coburn, if we don't pay her wages, and they're big wages, by the way, we go to prison. Andrew Marr, if we don't pay his big wages, we go to prison. If we refuse to fund state propaganda against the official opposition in the country, we go to prison. And that's not good enough. And as I said here earlier, maybe a couple of weeks ago, after this is over, there has to be a concerted attempt to force the BBC either to return to the days when they felt some professional obligation to maintain balance in current affairs and in politics, or we have to get rid of the BBC altogether. Personally, I prefer the latter option. But what is not acceptable is that we are forced to pay for a British version of Fox News. That ain't acceptable. So, I'm at war with the BBC, and they're at war with Jeremy Corbyn. And I'm going to be arguing when this is over that something must be done. I'll be talking to Bobby Friedman, who I'm told is vehemently anti-Jeremy Corbyn, but he's a political commentator, and so he's entitled to have his say, and he'll get it here, and I hope he's hard enough for what comes after it. Then, in the second hour, we'll be talking to Martin Williams, who's an investigative journalist, author of a newly released book called Parliament Limited, which I have the benefit of having read. And I tell you, if you read that book, you can only conclude that Parliament today is an Augean stable of corruption and malfeasance. There is no question at the end of that book that a very stiff and antiseptic broom has to be taken to the corridors of the Houses of Parliament, both of them, Commons and Lords. It staggered me, and I was in it for almost 30 years until just over a year ago. It staggered me, just like the Daily Telegraph's revelations, magnificent journalistic effort about MPs' expenses, which revealed to me, then a 25-year MP, the existence of something called the John Lewis list, of which I had been hitherto ignorant. I discovered that all of my parliamentary colleagues, more or less, were buying scatter cushions and getting their lofts renovated, their moats cleared, were buying their dinner at the expense of the public, claiming of the public. Jeremy Corbyn, by the way, is the lowest claiming Member of Parliament in Britain. Go figure. Now, this book had the same effect on me as the Daily Telegraph's revelations. And so I've asked the author, Martin Williams, to come and join us tonight. And in the third hour, Councillor Danny Hackett, who's a Labour councillor, a shadow cabinet member for regeneration and growth, and a self-proclaimed Blairite, joins me. Oh, Danny, I hope you've told Tony that you're turning up tonight because, well, stay tuned and you'll know why. If not for the purge and the gerrymandering, Jeremy Corbyn would have won the leadership election, which will be announced at midday tomorrow, by at least 80% to 20%. As it is, I feel sure he's going to win a landslide victory. I'm not, of course, in Liverpool for the conference. I don't know if Bobby is, but he's certainly keeping a sharp eye on it, as I am. Bobby Friedman, political commentator, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, George.
Are you looking forward to it, Bob?
Well, I mean, I'm looking forward to the end of the leadership contest, which has been pretty depressing, much like the Labour Party over the past year. But, I do agree with you that Jeremy Corbyn is going to win, and I think he'll win easily.
I think so. And, of course, the big story thereafter will be whether the people who've been defeated are ready to accept defeat, or if the war continues.
Well, it's not a question of whether they accept defeat. It's about whether they feel forced to sit on the front bench with someone who they fundamentally disagree with and who is fundamentally not going to win an election for the Labour Party, who's going to take the Labour Party to oblivion, worse than 1983, because that is what's going to happen if Jeremy Corbyn hangs on until the next election. And I tell you what, it's not good for anyone. It's not good for the Labour Party. It's not good for the country. It's not even good for Conservatives, because it's much better to have a strong and decent opposition. And at the moment, we have a one-party system in this country.
Well, how can that be the case if the great majority of Labour members have just re-elected him?
Because the great majority of Labour members do not represent the great majority of the British voting public.
But you do.
Well, I'm not saying I do. I'm saying that.
Well, you're speaking for that. You say you're speaking for the great majority of the British voting public. Let's get to first principles.
I'm telling you what the majority of the British public think, and we know that.
And how do you know what the British public think?
Well,
who are you even? I don't even know who you are. Who are you? Tell us who you are.
Well, it's unsurprising because you've blocked me on Twitter like you've blocked half of the nation, seemingly.
No,
let me tell you.
No,
do you want to know?
I do. But before you go on, I have 256,000 followers on Twitter. How many have you got?
Well, far fewer than that, but that's not the point. The point is...
You said I'd blocked half the nation. How can that be?
Well, I think that's a figure of speech. Are you saying you haven't blocked a lot of people on Twitter?
Well, I've got a lot of people on Twitter, but most people will already be bored of this point. So, tell us who you are. Tell us who you are.
Will you let me answer the question, though? You just keep barracking me.
Tell us who you are.
Well, I'm someone who's, unlike you seemingly, looked carefully at election results over the past year, looked carefully at opinion polls over the last year. I've looked at the fact that Jeremy Corbyn has got the worst opinion polling of any leader since polling began. The fact that Labour is running an average of 11 points behind the Conservatives, which will wipe out the party electorally. I'm looking at the fact that in the local council elections, Jeremy Corbyn performed worse than Ed Miliband. The fact that at this point in the electoral cycle, Corbyn's results are so far below what they need to be for him to win a majority that it simply won't happen. So I'm not saying that I personally stand up for the great majority of the British people. What I've done is actually go and do a careful analysis of the results.
But you're not dealing with the conundrum that's before us here. You are the font of all this wisdom, but hundreds of thousands of Labour members have just re-elected Jeremy Corbyn. So are they all idiots that cannot see the font of wisdom that you're gushing here? What is it?
Well, I'm sure that they think Jeremy Corbyn should be their leader, but ultimately they're unrepresentative of the wider voting public. And that's the difference between people who have very specific, narrow interest group views compared to the wider public.
You still haven't told me who you are. Just give me some of your qualifications to speak on behalf of the nation in this way. Have you ever been elected to anything?
No, and how did your last election go? Was it 1.43% in the London mayoral election?
No, actually, I got 6%, but that's not the point. I've been elected.
6%,
I did get 6%, 154,000 votes, but neither is that relevant. I was elected 6 times to Parliament, but that isn't relevant either. I'm asking you to back up these ex cathedra statements of extraordinary gravity that you are making on behalf of the nation by telling us who you are, what you've done, who you work for, if you've ever been elected. Give us some credentials.
No, well, I'm not an elected politician, as you should know if you've done your homework.
I don't do homework on people I've never heard of. I'm asking you, well, who do you work for then? Who do you work for?
Who do I work for? What, I mean, this is the most ridiculous...
So you don't actually work for anybody, and you've never been elected.
I work for people.
Well,
the point is, I'm a political commentator, George.
Well, that's what it says here, but you haven't told me for whom you politically commentate.
Right. Well, I've written for most, if not all, of the major British newspapers and magazines.
That's all I was asking. Well, you could have said that. That's all I was asking. So at least there have been people who treat you seriously enough to publish what you say, and that's important that we know that. So let me ask you this. Last night, Labour won 3 local government by-elections, 2 of them off the Conservatives and 1 of them off the SNP. Which rather shoots your fox, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't, because you're choosing incredibly isolated examples.
No, I'm choosing the only by-elections there were last night.
All right, there were only ones last night. What about the ones, I think it was last week in Sheffield, where Labour suffered an annihilation against a party that didn't even field a candidate the time before.
Okay.
So
and last night, and last night, what's your explanation for last night?
Well, if you think that you can extrapolate from 3 individual by-elections to a national position, then I think that's incredibly naive, and it's wrong. Well, what I tried to do is to extrapolate from the polls, to extrapolate from the local elections, which were a national poll, that Labour performed abysmally.
All right, let's go through that. There have been 4 parliamentary by-elections in the last 12 months of Corbyn's leadership, all the while being subverted and destabilised, and Labour won all 4 of them, 3 of them with increased majorities. They won the Bristol mayoralty, they won the London mayoralty, they won the local elections, and every test that has been put in front of Jeremy Corbyn, despite all of this endless aggro from people like you, he's won them all.
Well, I should say the only reason that what you call aggro is just an objective analysis of facts, and if you don't like the facts, well, that's where it is. But the elections that you haven't mentioned, for example, are the Scottish parliamentary elections.
Oh, well, and you want to blame Jeremy Corbyn? You want to blame Jeremy Corbyn for them?
Well, I might blame the leader of the party for the way in which his party...
You're having a laugh, aren't you? You're having a laugh, aren't you? They kept Jeremy Corbyn out of the country. The Scottish Labour leadership hate Corbyn as much as you hate him. And you want to blame Corbyn for the defeat of the Scottish...
I don't hate Corbyn.
Oh, my goodness. There will not be many people listening to you who doubt...
I'm not saying I don't hate him personally. I think he has a perfectly reasonable role to play in British politics, but not as a leader of a party. And you're asking whether he's going to win.
All right.
And he's not.
All right.
You know.
No, I didn't actually ask you if he's going to win. Neither Gordon Brown nor Ed Miliband won. And there is nobody on the current political scene who could say they're definitely going to defeat the Conservatives. But I'm telling you, the results last night were catastrophic for the Conservative Party. Despite all the help, objectively, that you and your friends have been giving them by this coup against Corbyn, last night the Conservatives did disastrously and Labour did well. And if you're a Labour member, you should be happy about that, no?
Well, this is another myth that's perpetrated, that somehow it's the coup that's caused Labour to be doing badly. I mean, that couldn't be further from the truth. Before the coup started, there have been 89 opinion polls whilst Jeremy Corbyn was leader, and all but 4 of them had him behind the Tories in those polls.
But
so that shows where he is.
But
the local elections were held well before the coup.
He won the local elections. He won the local elections.
George, you are far too experienced a politician not to know that the point in the political cycle matters. And the fact is that his performance was far worse than any other leader and far below any leader who went on to then win a subsequent general election.
Okay,
you know how the electoral cycle works.
What we're boiling this down to is that although he's won all the elections that have been put in front of him, he didn't win them well enough. That's your point.
No, my point is that he's not polling or getting the votes in elections that are anywhere near what he should be doing if he's going to form a government.
Well, yeah, but neither Gordon Brown nor Ed Miliband formed a government. You are aware of that, yeah?
Of course.
Both of them lost.
But did
you participate? Perhaps you're too young. Did you participate in this kind of jihad to get rid of Ed Miliband?
Well, I'm not sure what you refer to by the jihad to get rid of Ed Miliband.
No, I'm saying, were you involved? Did you and your friends think it was vital to get rid of the loser, Ed Miliband, in the way that you're so determined to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn?
If it had been up to me, which it wasn't, and I'm not sure who these friends are you're talking of, but my view at the time was that Ed Miliband was going to lose the election.
Did you write that? Did you say that?
I think I did, yes.
Yeah.
But the Labour Party is quite bad at changing leaders. I imagine if it had been a Conservative leader doing as Ed Miliband had done, they probably would have got rid of him, yeah.
Bobby, it's been a pleasure disagreeing with you. Thanks for joining us on Talk Radio.
Thank you, George.
Blood is coursing red through my veins. Here's an SMS. George, Liz Kendall was embarrassing at the least on yesterday's BBC Question Time by refusing to fully defend Corbyn against attacks by the majority of the panel, says Colin. I didn't actually see it, Colin. Obviously, I have substantial political disagreements with Liz Kendall. I've only met her once, but I must tell you she was gracious and kind, and I have no personal animus towards her at all. Salman says the Labour right Blairites are more interested in attacking Corbyn than attacking the Tories. The attacks won't end. And John Maher says we have the same problem with the media in the US. Let's hear from Christina in Essex.
Hello, George.
Christina, welcome. I hope you enjoyed that opener to the show.
Very much indeed. How are you?
I'm good. I'm warmed up now. You can see I'm warmed up. I'm ready to strike. I'm ready to strike. What do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I was just updating everyone and you yourself, because when I came on the show last week, I don't know if you remember, but I had the expulsion letter.
Oh, yes. You were expelled for being friendly with me.
Well, that is correct, and they say that it was because I was publicly supporting you.
Yeah, but as we ascertained last night, the opposite was true. I felt that you really let me down by going out campaigning with Sadiq Khan and the other Labourites in the London elections.
As I said to you at the time, I was committed. You know, I was involved in things at grassroots, and so I'm very loyal. So, as I said to you, George, my head was with Labour, but obviously my heart was with you.
Sure, well, that's allowed. I mean, I've been in that situation many times. So what's happened now? Are you still expelled? Have you appealed?
I have written a letter of appeal, but I don't know if I'm entitled to do that, because obviously they said that I'm not in the original letter. So I waited for the evidence to arrive, and it did arrive. And isn't it strange that everybody's evidence seems to go out, or the letters go out on a Saturday when you can't make any contact? Isn't that strange?
I don't think they're that well organised. That's probably a coincidence, but I might be wrong.
Anyway, so it had said that I was going to be receiving the evidence because apparently I had supported you publicly via social media on the 6th of March. So that's what I was expecting, the evidence for that. But then I got realms and realms of evidence of like tweets and retweets where the word traitor or Blairite had been used. But obviously that was on the Essex Socialists on Twitter.
Yeah, that's a collective Twitter handle.
Yes,
In any case, the word Blairite was not criminalised until after that.
That's what I said. That was my argument. That's what I said in the
You can't
appeal as well.
retrospectively apply that. I mean, it's come to something when to describe someone as a Blairite is regarded as a swear word in the opinion of the Blairites. I mean,
it's highly amusing, really.
You couldn't make it up. But in any case, if that's all they've got against you, then you'll be readmitted pretty soon, because these words, traitor, backstabber, Blairite, were only criminalised after that date.
Exactly. But what really upset me, this is the thing that really upset me, is that they had I don't know how, either they've got into my personal account in my own name on Facebook, which I only use for my very, for close friends and family, and they produced a lot of photographs from there, and I don't even know how they got them. I don't know if someone sent them or they've got into my account, and I'm thinking, what is the significance of these photographs? And they even included my parents, that are now obviously in heaven, which really upset me at the time. Can you imagine that?
So they broke in to your personal Facebook account and took pictures of it.
Yeah.
Well, that's
the evidence they sent, yes.
That's a criminal offence. That's an offence under the Data Protection Acts. I need to get you a lawyer, Christina. We have to go on the front foot on this. They have absolutely no right, but more importantly, politically. We just had that joker on talking about how much better Labour needs to do, whilst the Labour machine is going through the personal Facebook of Christina in Essex to look at her photographs. When they've got the whole Tory government to fight, that's what they're doing with their time and with your money.
And they're providing that. They actually provided that as the evidence. So that I was expecting that something from, which they said, the 6th of March 2016, and then I'm confronted with photos of me, my family members, my mum and dad who are in heaven, God rest their soul, and I found it so upsetting. As you know, last Sunday, that really, really, really upset me. I found it so intrusive.
Well, I'll tell you what, Christina, I'm pledging you now, I'm going to make it my personal mission to get justice for you and get you back into the Labour Party. Christina in Essex, thanks for kicking off the callers. Paul in Manchester is here now, up next. Go ahead, Paul.
Good evening, sir.
Hi.
You've got a great show.
Thank you. It's good radio, yeah.
Couple of questions. When are you going to come back to the Labour Party? The Labour Party needs people like you. Well,
that's very kind. I demand that they rescind my unfair, unjust expulsion in 2003. And it's quite simple, really. There's a symmetry involved. Everybody who's been purged in the Blair era, up to and including this week, needs to be reinstated.
Of course you do, especially you.
Thank you.
Because you're a fantastic orator. I've always had a lot of respect for you, George.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate that.
The other one was, sir, the first caller you had on.
Yes.
The audacity of the guy. Who is he to think that when Jeremy Corbyn is re-elected tomorrow, and there should never have been a coup against him in the first place, but when he's re-elected, he seems to be thinking that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't deserve to be a leader, and that the Labour Party will never be able to get into power.
Well, it's a bit like the mother that watches the passing out parade at Catterick on the parade ground and says that she enjoyed the parade, but everybody was out of step except her Johnny.
Yeah. Speaking as an ex-soldier, I know exactly what you're talking about, sir.
I mean, I kept asking him, well, if all you say is true, why have hundreds of thousands of Labour members just voted for him?
Yeah, exactly.
And he didn't have an answer to that.
Well, he wouldn't even say who he was. You had to drag it out of him.
Yeah, I mean, what they're saying, effectively, is that all these hundreds of thousands are idiots, and that they are who speak for the 1% are the people who should rule. It's a profoundly anti-democratic creed.
Well, I don't know whether he's a member of the Tory party or what he is.
No, he's a Labour member.
Well, he's supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's
hard to tell sometimes.
Well, yeah. The other thing, sir, is am I right in saying that there were two people brought to the verge of bankruptcy with regards to the legal costs for the...
Yes. The Labour members in Purge 1, remember there's Purge 1 and Purge 2, who took the matter to court and won, and then the General Secretary of the Labour Party took it back to court, to the Court of Appeal, and in very controversial circumstances, the General Secretary won, and costs were awarded, indeed pursued, by the General Secretary against his own members. So your money, if you're a member, Paul, your money was used to go to the High Court to stop members voting and using their money for the court costs. It's unbelievable.
Wasn't one of them a youngster, George?
One was legally a child.
Yeah.
Couldn't make it up.
Well,
listen, Paul, I'm going to press on. God bless you. Thanks very much for your kind words. I want to hear from Brian in Cornwall, who's a traveller, a showman, who's getting abuse. And I never put up with that. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, yes, George. Yeah, thank you for having me on. My name's Brian. I've put in planning permission for a bungalow, a house, first of all, on a brownfield site. It's in a very posh area of Cornwall in St Million.
Okay.
And what I had is, because before they knew I was from a travelling family, I had nobody objecting to my planning application, the first one. It got refused by the council. Then it went to appeal. Then it didn't get the appeal got refused, but nobody did object. Then the appeals inspector said it was too dominant, too high. So then we put in for a planning permission for a bungalow, a dormer bungalow. Then the residents found out I was from a travelling background. I've had dog poo put in my letterbox, racist abuse like we don't people like you here. Carries on and carries on, and 10 objections on the website, on the internet, and they've had to take 2 of them off because they were racist.
My goodness!
And so there's 8 now, and
which council is this, Brian?
And this is Cornwall Council. This is Cornwall Council.
Well, I hope they're listening. I hope someone from there is listening. I hope some of the political representatives of Cornwall are listening. If they're not, you definitely need to contact them. You need an appointment with your MP pretty damn quick, and you need to tell them that you've just spoken about this to the whole country, indeed wider than this country, on Talk Radio.
But what's happening now is I'll go into appeal again now. The local council, one councillor was supporting me. They got the parish council, which is the directors of this park. They called directors. They called an extraordinary council meeting to object to my planning. It was nothing. All what the inspector said. They didn't believe the government inspector. This is a government inspector. The parish council failed to take what the governor and the government inspector had to say. It was a brownfield site, and
a brownfield site, a bungalow with a dormer, on the face of it, cannot be rejected. On the face of it, I don't know all the facts, of course, but hold on. What cannot be accepted is that your ethnicity can in any way, shape, or form be a factor in any of these decisions. The fact that you are from a travelling background has absolutely nothing to do with planning law or planning decisions at all. So on the face of it, as you presented it, as I say, I don't know all the facts, there's a scandal here that the local media need to get looking at. Brian, I've got to press on because this is kind of off topic, but I'm sympathetic to you and I hope it goes well, but I'll need to move on. End of the world man tweets, when Corbyn wins, what should he do to prevent perpetual sabotage? Can he be tough enough to survive? Well, what's required is a balance, a mix of hard and soft, of good cops and bad cops. There's got to be, and Jeremy's growing, literally growing, an olive branch on the balcony outside his office. And that olive branch has to be extended, no doubt, to people of goodwill who are prepared to say, well, we've had 2 goes now, 2 goes in 12 months, and the members have spoken, this time even more clearly than the first time. And we have to accept that. And there's got to be a broad church in the Labour Party, because under our first-past-the-post system, you can't afford a bird can't fly with one wing. There have to be Social Democrats and Socialists together under one banner in the Labour Party, at least until we get proportional representation, when everyone can go their own way, and however the chips fall in the subsequent PR elections, that will be a fairer, maybe even, depending on the system, a perfectly fair representation on what the politics of the country are. But under this system, there has to be a broad church. And there always was in the past, until Tony Blair was elected. And this is important. I was personally a friend of Harold Wilson, James Callaghan, Michael Foot, Neil Kinnock in the beginning, Gordon Brown, John Smith, God rest his soul. I was personally friendly with all these people, even though I had political disagreements, often sharp, with all of them. And that's the way it should be. There needs to be a left and a right, and they need to all be in the same party. And they need to serve the party on the back benches or on the front benches, if they're invited so to serve, with a good democratic spirit. It doesn't mean they put away their own politics or their own perspective. It doesn't mean they can't argue the toss, even endlessly, inside the party for their own point of view. I would, if I was in the party. I have disagreements with Jeremy Corbyn on some matters. And if I was back in the party, I'd argue them out with them. But what I wouldn't do, couldn't do, and wouldn't expect to be allowed to do, is pocket my wages, get elected to Parliament on a Labour ticket, and then spend virtually every day trying to damage the Labour Party that put me there and put the wages in my pocket. That's unacceptable. Now, Jeremy's a nicer guy than me. That's why he's the leader, and I never could have been. He leans towards leniency. I lean the other way. But even I understand that it is important to reach out and take the hand of all who are prepared to meet you halfway and take it. And that's what I think that Jeremy Corbyn will do. He can't sack the people that loyally stayed and have served and done a good job, actually, in the front bench, in the absence of these supposedly grander figures who vacated the park. He can't sack them. He can't give the likes of Hilary Benn, even if he would take it, the job back that he walked out of. That would be ridiculous. But I hope that things calm down in the Labour Party after this weekend. But I very much doubt it. Let me run through some more. Mr. Skylord says, yeah, but it's a defeat after Miliband's rule change, which wouldn't reply if those rules hadn't changed. Sorry, you lost me there, mate. George Galloway on fire today on talkRADIO, says Eroded Pebble 88. Well, so I am. Celt Islam says the attack on democracy by the political class manifests their hypocrisy and their career agenda. It actually takes your breath away, you know. I mean, today I read, it's in The Canary, which is a wonderful publication. The Canary Says, I think it's called on Twitter. The Canary is the name of the publication. It's online. We had the founder and editor of it on my RT TV show a few weeks ago. They had a story today about a known columnist on The Guardian, a guy called Lezard, Nicholas Lezard, a known name, guy who writes for many papers, who said on Facebook that he wanted to crowdfund for the assassination of Jeremy Corbyn. And the person he was writing to replied, "Don't worry, something's cooking." Now, there's a huge furore about this. The police have been called. Can you imagine if Corbynistas were caught saying something like that about somebody, about Owen Smith? What about crowdfunding for his assassination? Somebody replies, "Don't worry, we've got something cooking." They've lost all sense of perspective, these people. I mean, I had to serve in the Labour Party under people and under periods where I absolutely hated everything that the political leaders were doing. Tony Blair. I was a Labour MP under his leadership. I hated him and everything that he stood for. But I didn't go on media discussing crowdfunding his assassination, talking about something cooking to physically harm him. I mean, this is completely berserk. It is politics gone mad. This is why I asked this fellow earlier, were you like this under the previous two losers? Let's assume your premise that Corbyn is a loser. There were two losers before him, Ed Miliband and Gordon Brown. Were you bonkers to get rid of him and them also? And of course the answer is no. Everybody knew that Ed Miliband was leading Labour to defeat. If you had any sense, you knew it. He couldn't even eat a bacon sandwich in front of a camera without looking like something from Mars. Everybody knew he was leading Labour to defeat. But nobody, least of all the people that are now gung-ho day and night after Corbyn, none of them were treating Miliband in the way that they are treating Corbyn. Bill says, question time has turned into bashing Corbyn hour. It's a disgrace. Most of the panel are always anti-JC. Florence apologists, or apologise, I think Florence apologise, says, that'll be you and the right-wing press then. Great. I don't know what that means. Balder the Brave says, well, Bobby was hard enough, he didn't back down. Great opening caller. No, you're right, he didn't back down, you're right. Dougs McAuliffe says, no, they're not, but they're repeating past mistakes, making Labour unelectable. Please tell me different. Well, I did. Corbyn has won every election that's been put in front of him over the last 12 months. Every single one. And in the case of the parliamentary by-elections, with an increased majority. He won 3 by-elections last night. 2 of them from the Tories in rural England. And 1 of them off the SNP in Scotland. That's pretty good going. But you wouldn't know it if you listened to the likes of Bobby. It's the mother of all talk shows. In the first hour, we were talking about Corbyn and the Labour conference, the result of the leadership election announced tomorrow. And of course, we're continuing to take calls on that. In this next half hour, you're going to hear things about your parliament that will make your hair stand on end. It's the mother of all talk shows. I sat in Parliament for almost 30 years. And I said at the beginning of the show, in introducing this topic, that the Daily Telegraph's Pulitzer winning journalism, if the Pulitzer was given to journalists here, was a total revelation to me. I had sat for decades in Parliament next to people who were filling their pockets and filling their houses with expenses claims about which I knew nothing. I discovered from the Daily Telegraph that there was something called the John Lewis list, which was a list of things from pots and pans to scatter cushions, to people to clean your house, to people to clean the moss off your country house, clean your stables, dredge your moat. I mean, I'm not making any of this up. I discovered that you could buy a house and claim it as your primary residence, whilst your actual primary residence was somewhere else, in other words, where your spouse and your children were. But you could claim it was House A, so as that you could then flip it and avoid paying tax on the profit you were making from the sale of a house which the public had provided through the handsome housing allowance that you were given. Now, maybe it's just as well that I knew nothing of these things, and therefore was able to emerge from the Daily Telegraph's journalism spotlessly, because I didn't even know you could claim for your dinner. It didn't occur to me that the public should pay for my pie and chips, because I would have had to eat that pie of chips whether I was a member of Parliament or a plumber. And I wouldn't expect anybody else to buy it for me as a plumber, so why would I expect them to do so as a member of Parliament? Anyway, that startled me. It profoundly shook me. Not as much as the fact that some members of the Cabinet were involved and were allowed to go on sitting in the Cabinet, even though they ought to have been sitting in Holloway or Brixton Prison for what they had done. But that was before I read Parliament Limited. Before I met the young man that wrote it, Martin Williams, an investigative journalist. His book, Parliament Limited, is as powerful to me as the Daily Telegraph revelations were. And that's why I'm glad to say he joins us now this evening. Martin Williams, tell us what's in Parliament Limited.
Thank you, George. Well, it's. I think I started investigating because we have a perception, I think, in the public that our MPs, our politicians, are on the take. We think of our politicians as greedy and corrupt sometimes, and a lot of the time people don't necessarily have the facts. They think that they're greedy and corrupt, but they don't necessarily have the facts to prove it and to back it up. And so with Parliament Limited, I really wanted to explore that and see if I could give some facts for it. So with Parliament Limited, one of the main areas of research that I did was, for the first time, I looked at the company directorships held by politicians. So I looked at every MP and every peer in the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and for the first time I got a figure which was around nearly 2,800 directorships held by our politicians for about 2,500 companies. And those companies together, they're not just little companies. I mean, some of them are uncontroversial, but as a combined force, they bring in every year about £220 billion of revenue, and they employ their employees are roughly equivalent to around 1 in 20 of the UK's full-time workforce. So this is a huge, powerful business conglomerate that is being controlled by the people running the country. So they're not just running the politics, they're running the business as well. But the most staggering thing, I think, was that out of all these company directorships, when I tallied those figures up, with what has been declared in the official public declarations, the Register of Interest. Only about 40% of those directorships were fully declared. Now, they didn't all have to be declared. The rules themselves are very lax, and that is a whole another issue that maybe we can talk about later, but the rules are terrible. And so a lot of these things, they don't even have to be declared. We, the public, are told that we have no right to know these things. But nevertheless, about 40% of company directorships held by politicians are not declared. And they range from inconsequential little businesses to big financial firms. One MP was a partner in a limited liability partnership, which helped non-doms to dodge tax, and that was not declared. That had not been declared. So this is a huge issue, which clearly the influence of business and big business and money in Parliament is, and it's being ignored by politicians. It's being ignored by Westminster.
So that's one set of issues. There are other issues, and we're going to come on to them. But let's stick with them first of all. How can it be the case that you are not required to declare that you are a director of a company while sitting in Parliament? How? And how can 60% declare it, but 40% do not?
Simply because the rules, well, two things. First of all, the rules are terrible. So just to give you an example of the type of thing, you are not only do you not have to give full details about shareholdings, but the rules literally say, I think I've got it here, the rules literally say you must not give the value of your shareholding.
Wow.
So it's not just that they're lax, they literally tell politicians, don't declare too much, don't be too transparent. The same goes for housing. I think this is right in the House of Lords. Lords are told that they should only declare property if it's worth at least £250,000. Anything less is seen as inconsequential. We have no right to know, apparently. So that's one thing. The rules themselves are terrible, and with directorships, if they're not being paid a salary, that's deemed to be, something that we don't deserve to know about.
Who would be a director of a company if there were no financial benefits for them? Why would you take on the responsibility, legal responsibility, of being a director if there was no advantage of any kind to you?
Yeah, but even if let's assume that there are no financial advantages. Let's just assume that as a hypothetical. There's still an influence. Yeah. You're still going into another place, and you've got perhaps you've got a boss or something like that. You've got other outside influences. Now, that's not to say that we should necessarily ban directorships. There's good arguments for and against MPs having outside interests. But the point is, whatever you think about that, surely we should at least know. Surely we should at least be able to know my MP has these outside interests.
Absolutely. And then let me take another apparently tangential point, but I think it's more than that. It does not require you to register your spouse's financial interests. Now, this is ridiculous. I mean, is it political correctness? If I have, as I do, a wife with whom I live, what she earns and how she earns it is vitally important to my life and my lifestyle. So if I'm a politician, why shouldn't I have to declare? There's a very famous, now infamous, member of Parliament, in a bit of trouble at the moment, who has vast property interests, but hey, it's the wife that owns the property. Yeah, right. I mean, shouldn't that be also covered? It should be that your household's interest should be declared.
Yes, well, that would make sense, wouldn't it? That would make sense. But unfortunately, the whole system of transparency in Parliament it's not just that it's bad, it's an embarrassment, really, to our democracy. An example for you is just the way that these things are audited and checked. Even if you accept the way that these things are declared or not declared, the Register of Interests is audited by, guess who? Absolutely no one. no one checks the register of interests. There's no one going and checking, and this is what I did in my book. I went through every item of the register of interests and checked it. Have they missed anything out? Are they earning extra money from another source that they've not told us about? No one is doing this. There's no official person in charge to do this. There is one person, the Commissioner for Standards, but she does not actually audit the register of interests. All she does is if there is a complaint.
Yeah, I mean, the supposition is that these are people of honour.
Yeah.
And that we must take them at their honour. But it has already been abundantly proven that, the more they talk of their honour, the faster we must count our spoons. They are dishonourable, disreputable, in huge numbers, in the hundreds and hundreds. So what justification is there for nobody auditing a more or less voluntary declaration of wealth and interest?
It's worse than that, actually. If you try to... So the head of transparency, I would say, the director of standards, the commissioner for standards, who's sort of in charge of looking after transparency, her office is pretty much exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. So the person in charge of transparency does not have to disclose information. I mean, it's really just farcical. You couldn't make it up. And in fact, I have put in complaints about a number of politicians as a result of my investigation. And believe it or not, for the politicians where they've not come to a conclusion yet, or they've dropped the case, I can't tell you the reasons why they've dropped the case. And the reason I can't tell you that is because it is literally illegal for me to read out letters that I have written to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. There is a law against it. It's punishable by prison, I believe, actually.
The Tower of London, probably.
Yes, yeah.
It is astounding. Now, after the break, I want you to tell us about landlordism. Because it turns out that most MPs are landlords, actually owning property and letting it out to others. This is in a country where the state spends in excess of £20 billion on housing benefit to tenants, something of some importance. I'm talking with Martin Williams. He's a young and very clever and very brave man, an investigative journalist, author of the newly released Parliament Limited. If you only buy one book that I recommend this year, you need to buy this one. We're talking to Martin Williams, an investigative journalist, author of the newly released Parliament Limited, which is a horror story, I'm bound to tell you, even for me, who spent almost 30 years sitting in it. And Martin's here with me now in the studio. Martin, not that many people in Britain are landlords, but rather a lot of parliamentarians are. Tell us.
Yeah, well, actually around 2% of the public are landlords. But if you go to Westminster, you'll find that 30% of MPs are landlords. I think an analysis by The Guardian found that 39% of Tories were MPs, 26% of MPs were landlords, and 22% of Labour MPs were also landlords. And
you see, the Tories doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
My kind of, if you like, prototype or archetype of a Tory is a man with a waxed moustache throwing a widow and her children out onto the streets on Christmas Eve because they couldn't pay their rent. But here we have the SNP bristling with leftism, and Labour, where basically a quarter of them are landlords. What's that all about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you get paid a fair whack of money for being an MP, I mean, again, this is not. I think the point I would try and make is not necessarily that MPs should be banned from ever owning any property, but the point is that it does present a problem, which is that we've got a housing crisis in this country, and if all the people making the decisions are landlords, then it's going to be no surprise when things turn out quite favourably for the landlords. And to give you an example of that, I think it was in January of this year, there was a law proposed which would have made... it was basically saying that landlords should make sure that the homes that they provide are fit for habitation. And that was blocked.
You would have thought that...
Yeah. You would have thought that would be... Well, I would have thought it was a law already. But
think that would pass Nem Con.
But apparently not. That was blocked by a load of MPs, including 72 of whom were landlords, each earning at least £10,000 a year as a landlord. And those are just the landlords who've declared that they're a landlord. There's God knows how many others.
There are many others who are landlords but haven't declared it.
Yes.
There are many others who are landlord because their wife or their husband is a landlord, so they're living off the proceeds of landlordism. Now, what about health? That's a big, rich pickings, isn't it? Did you find examples of people?
Yeah, there are some examples, but I think, well, for instance, there's a lord who had a directorship at a company that was basically helping private clients to profit from the NHS, essentially. I think with a lot of these things, it's often very hard to tie these things together and to connect them and to say this person is a director of this company and therefore they're cashing. It's done in a very subtle way that makes it very hard for the public to really know what's going on. And hopefully, I've sort of tried to lay these things out a bit clearly in my book and show where these levels of influence are. The problem. I think is most clear with banks and the financial sector. And one of the bits of research I did was looking at the banking reform bill. Now, this was like the government's, one of their first chances really to really, if they'd wanted to, lay into the banks and change the way that our banking system works. And it didn't do anything near that. It was a complete failure, really. It really didn't make anything very... It didn't really improve anything. So what I did was I looked at the financial interests of the Lords, the members of the House of Lords, who were the most influential, people who spoke at more than one stage of the proceedings. And what I found, out of those Lords, 2/3 were in the pay of the very institutions that they were claiming to regulate. Banks, financial services, mortgage companies, insurance companies. These were the people who were making who were reforming the banks. They were trying to clean up the banking sector, but they were in the pay of them.
It is extraordinary, and it's important that you've made this turn now to the House of Lords because, of course, the Commons gets most attention. Therefore, more of them get rumbled. Although there have been Lords leaping, sucking cocaine off the bodies of prostitutes, not the dead bodies, it wasn't that bad, sniffing cocaine off the torsos of prostitutes whilst carrying on their business as legislators. There's thousands of members of the House of Lords. Most of them are completely unknown, and their activities, not the prostitutes on the cocaine and so on, but their financial money-making activities are very largely ignored. But you looked into some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I looked into the directorships of every single one of them, and as you say, there's hardly any checking of what they're doing. No one really cares. They're just allowed to do what on earth they like to do, and now to be. Some of the time, people will defend them, saying, well, people in the Lords don't have really that much influence, so, we don't need to necessarily regulate them so much. But, I mean, that's just, as you know, it's just not true. No. They can vote on laws in the same way as MPs can, or almost all laws. They get paid £300 a day just for turning up. That's before expenses.
By the way, you can turn up, but turning up means going in one door and you can go out the back door and you still get your £300.
Yeah. And now there's also this problem with Lords turning up, collecting their expenses, and then going home again without doing any work, or certainly without any trace of any work. Yeah. And so that's one of the things I looked at and tried to get the data for, and I found that there was a gang of 34 Lords who'd never voted throughout the entire year, and they claimed £130,000 between them. And there were also Lords who were, not only did they not vote, they also didn't speak. So basically did nothing. And between them, they earned, they claimed nearly £29,000 in expenses. Eight lords who just did essentially nothing.
Now, did you get anywhere with any of these cases, or is it would we? You have to kill us if you told us. Wasn't there one lady that was forced to apologise?
That's right. Yeah, there's a few complaints I've put in that I'm still waiting to hear back on. There was one Baroness Greenfield who she had. She was made non-executive director of a company that basically helped clients to benefit from university intellectual property rights, and the company's slogan was literally helping clients profit from university intellectual capital. And
Clear enough what it says on the tin.
Yeah, and she made a speech in Parliament without declaring that, basically promoting the idea that universities should open up their intellectual property rights to private investors, and she didn't mention the fact that she had this interest in a company. So she was investigated, and they said that the punishment for this was not that she would be kicked out of the Lords or given a fine. Her punishment was that she had to write a letter of apology to the chairman of a subcommittee, and then she's allowed to just carry on as normal. She apologised, and no one's, the media haven't reported it.
And look, we've had half an hour, but we've run out of time. This is all before we look at the issue of the revolving door, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
People leaving office and going round the revolving door and emerging as highly paid employees or consultants or directors with the very companies that their government departments have been handing, in some cases, billions of pounds worth of public money to in contracts.
Yeah, and now these, when a minister goes from government into the private sector, they're supposed to have their appointments checked over by, there's a committee called the ACOBA, it's called. They're meant to look at where they're getting their jobs and whether there's a conflict of interest there. But to give you just a little idea of how toothless this watchdog is, out of all, in the last 5 years, around 500 applications have been put in for politicians wanting to get private sector jobs, and out of those, 100% have been accepted. Not one time
I saw
has the committee turned around and said, no, you can't have that job.
The former head of the army has just taken a position in a part of the military-industrial complex that the army he was the head of expended something like £5 billion through. And he wasn't even asked to wait beyond Christmas before taking up the cudgels on behalf of the military-industrial complex.
You can do it while you're still in there. Look at Nicholas Soames, who talks regularly on foreign affairs and military
matter.
And he has been involved in a private defence company which is active in one of the main benefactors actually from the Iraq War. Has made huge money from the Iraq War, and I think Afghanistan as well.
Malcolm Rifkind was another one. He was an arms dealer whilst in the Commons. He's of course no longer there and can't get into the Lords because he was caught trying to get a Chinese takeaway by a Chinese company that turned out to be Channel 4's dispatches.
And if you read the book, you'll see an interview with Malcolm Rifkind about that very issue.
Absolutely fantastic. Martin Williams, author of Parliament Limited. If you only buy one book this year that I recommend, buy that one. Well, I don't know if, like me, you were blown away by the stuff in that book. I was, by the scale of it, by the scale of the largesse. And this book, Parliament Limited, which is published by one of the country's top publishing houses, Hodder and Stoughton, by Martin Williams, is well worth a read. But in a way, the most telling point was the first one that he made. All of us actually know now that our political class is deeply corrupt. One of the reasons why they hate Jeremy Corbyn so much is that he is not at all corrupt. And they cannot bear. It's a bit like JC, the original, walking in amongst the money changers outside the temple. It's very hard for them. Because here's a guy who doesn't care about money, who doesn't want to be a money changer, a money lender. He doesn't want to be involved in all this business malarkey. He's an good and honest man, and that's one of the reasons why they hate him so very much. So we all knew, as Martin Williams said, that they were corrupt, but we didn't necessarily have the facts to back it up. Well, he's got facts by the 100, by the 1,000 in that book. McLondon says, I actually can't stomach listening about the amoral greedsters. Well, you have to. Kashia Richardson says it just shows the people have finally had enough of all the lies and deceit peddled by the rest of the PLP and the media. Ricardo Picasso says he means the Labour right, the Blairites, are literally saying that Corbyn and everyone who wants him are wrong. In a democracy, the majority is right. Well, that's a fact, but they're even planning, Owen Smith is even planning on not accepting the result of the referendum on the EU. Indeed, that's one of his selling points. Keno, too, says Baron Kinnock expelled thousands. He was the original Blairite thug. Why are you seemingly ignoring this? Kashia again says, I agree they once were objective, that's the BBC, but now bloody cookery programmes are headline news and the truth is fiction. Let's hear from James in Southampton on the lines. Go ahead, James.
Hello.
Hi, you're on the air.
Yeah, I just heard you talk about the House of Lords. Nothing that they do in the House of Lords or the House of Commons where corruption is concerned actually surprises me one bit, to be honest.
The scale of it is startling, isn't it? The fact that well over a third, getting towards a half, of all parliamentarians are private landlords, for example. That's a bit surprising, isn't it?
It's a bit much, but it doesn't really surprise me, to be honest. I mean, I know that people who were members of the House of Lords who would go into the House of Lords, sign in, and then sign back out and get their £300. And I think something similar happens with the EU, where they can sign in the European Parliament and then just bugger off for the day.
Not for very much longer, thank goodness.
Yeah, but this is one of the reasons why the House of Lords and the Commons, where they're so corrupt and they're paymasters, this is why they will not stop to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn. Because, as far as they can see, these people who get 10, 20 million pounds a year salary, in their warped ideology, they need that money. So if Jeremy Corbyn comes in and he makes a beeline for these, the super rich and the political elite, well, as far as they can see, that's their livelihood that he's eyeing up. So that they won't stop, until they get rid of him,
well,
which is unfortunate.
Of course, the question is predicated on the assumption that they can. But they are few, and we are many. This is the important point about a democracy. We are many, they are few. And in a democracy, it's counting heads that counts. And if the people can be so won to a position that they're prepared to vote for honesty, they're prepared to vote against dishonesty, they're prepared to reward with political support those who wish to clean up these Augean stables, and vote against those who fouled them in the first place, then we win, James.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully that happens. But, these people, they make the rules, they write the rules, and then when the rules don't suit them, they just change the rules, and that's what worries me. The IMF, only 6 months ago, changed its own rules because it didn't suit it when it was giving money to Ukraine. And they just went and rewrote the rules. And unfortunately, these people they're inside, they're in the establishment, they have the power, and the people behind them with the money. And
yes, but we mustn't be defeatist, James.
Oh, no, I'm not defeatist, but
because that's what they want, yeah? They want everyone to conclude that either it's always been thus and always will be thus, or you can try but you'll fail. That's what their project depends on. It depends on us believing that we can do nothing about this.
Yeah, well, I think partly you're right, but also they're trying to get to the people who maybe don't know all this nefarious stuff that is going on, and they're trying to get them to not trust anyone that they listen to. So they don't trust the BBC, but then they don't trust a media channel like RT, and they confuse them so much. I mean, people like you and me, we're always going to be, at their throats, making sure that they don't win. But it's the people who are maybe less knowledgeable about things like this.
Well, it's our job to make them more knowledgeable, and there are more knowledgeable people in this country today than there have ever been.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Ignorance is a choice nowadays. James in Southampton, thanks for that call. The Beano is being relaunched. You know the Beano, Dennis the Menace, Beryl the Peril, Gnasher, as my son calls him, Gnasher the dog, Bash Street Kids. I mean, a phenomenal thing. I mean, they come from my own city of Dundee. More than 30, in fact, nearly 40 years ago now, when I was a bit of a political big wheel in the city, I tried to persuade D.C. Thompson, the creator of all these characters, to have a kind of theme park, kind of Disneyland in Dundee under glass to maximise the very sunny days you get there. And we could have had Dennis the Menace and so on as a huge tourist attraction, but D.C. Thompson were rather set in their ways, rather conservative, and wouldn't wear it. Although I understand on Netflix now there is a Dennis the Menace show for kids. Must check it out. Anyway, we're talking about Parliament Limited, the Augean stables that I talked about, that badly need a stiff broom sweeping through them, and talking about Labour and the conference. And Scott in Glasgow is on the line about that latter point. Scott, you're welcome. Go ahead.
Hi there, George. Nice to speak to you again.
Okay.
It's just a wee point about how Jeremy Corbyn, he made me smile again today in a good way. He seems to pull these rabbits out of the hat for the left of the party, that he was going to appoint a Minister for Peace and Disarmament. And I don't know, in all the time that I've kind of been following politics, that I've ever heard of that before. Has there been?
No, there has not. No, there has not. I mean, in Orwell's 1984, of course, the Ministry of Defence is called the Ministry of Peace, even though its job is to make war. It's a kind of doublespeak. So Jeremy's turning the tables on that with this one.
He definitely is. And it was one other point I was going to make. Would it be a bad move for him to reinstate Clause 4, do you think?
I think it would. I'm not wild about the Ministry of Peace idea either. I did say earlier I've got some political disagreements with Jeremy Corbyn,
right,
and both of those would be one of them. I think to reinstate something that was actually widely ignored in the first place would be an unnecessary provocation, and I don't think he'll do that. I, of course, opposed root and branch the abolition of Clause 4, but decades have gone by now, and we're well into the 21st century now. This was abolished in 1994, I think, or 95.
By Tony Blair.
By Tony Blair. I remember right. I don't myself think that it would be wise to do that. It would seem backward-looking when Jeremy has to show that he's for the future, and I'm sure that he'll do that. The Ministry of Peace thing, I've got doubts about it because it can make you look weak on defence. And I think the Labour Party has to be strong on defence. It has to say that if anyone attacks us, we'll defend ourselves.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Go ahead.
Sorry, George. I don't disagree. I don't disagree with you there. It's just the actual words themselves. You never hear of anything like that. And Jeremy Corbyn looks further than his front door. That's the thing that I really like about him. He looks further. He's got a world view rather than just a country view. And this is the thing that really, really appeals to me about him. There's no another politician like him. And something similar. To me, he's similar to a non-violent Che Guevara, where if Corbyn fell down, he would be wanting somebody just to come at the back of him, because he doesn't want the glory. That's not what he wants. He doesn't want glory. He wants world peace as much as it sounds pie in the sky. That's what the guy wants.
No, of course he does, and he's right to work for it. And I think someone, although there's a shortage of people on the front bench, I don't think that's going to change. But if he can appoint someone to who has the job of seeking peaceful alternatives to war in the resolution of disputes and so on, he should definitely do that. But I just say it's very important that Labour is seen as a party that will defend the country, that will defend the people in the country, that will defend people at home, and will defend our interests if anyone abroad seeks to damage them.
I agree with you.
But that means we need a properly resourced police force. It means we need a properly resourced armed forces to defend ourselves, not to go around the world attacking other people, but to defend ourselves. And that's where the problem has been over recent years. The failure to properly identify or properly define what defence is. In fact, for most of my time in Parliament, our Ministry of Defence was a ministry of offence. It was a ministry of attack rather than a ministry of defence. But at the same time, we mustn't be found wanting in terms of defending our people. Scott, great to talk to you, as always. Scott in Glasgow. Ian Mortimer says, if Kinnock had put as much effort into opposing Thatcher as he does Corbyn, he might have won an election. It wasn't really energy that was the problem with Kinnock. It was credibility. Richard says, right now it has good, bad and incompetent cops. Well, there's no doubt about that. I was marvelling the other day, if marvelling is the word, at the video, which is now the subject of an IPCC inquiry, of a police officer actually cutting open the windscreen of a driver who was not the person that he thought he was approaching. It was mistaken identity. The driver was terrified to get out of the car as the copper was demanding, so the copper started smashing the windows in his car. Salman says, one could say Corbyn's biggest mistake that he was too good and kind. Well, there is some grounds for worrying about that. Maynard Cole says, I'm glad Corbyn is reaching out again, but we need to stamp out any further dissent quickly and firmly. Well, I'm against stamping out dissent, either firmly or quickly. Dissent is a necessary thing in a democratic living organisation. And there's absolutely no case for cracking down on dissent. But there has to be a limit to how you express that dissent. I mean, if you're an MP and you're going out talking to television cameras, and I've seen many MPs do this, and saying that our leader is a turkey, our leader is not fit to be the leader, he's not fit to be the Prime Minister, well, why should people vote for you then? If he's your leader, why should people vote for your party? If he remains the leader, why would they vote for your party? If they believed you and that the leader was a stoomer, why should they vote for you? Now, in that case, not only are the MPs actually damaging their own prospects of re-election. They are damaging the Labour Party, the wider Labour movement, and the people who depend on Labour to represent them and to defend them. So there have to be limits. You can't go around telling any camera that will listen, any microphone that will listen, that your leader is the worst thing since Dr. Crippen, because that's just self-disfiguration. And that's what a lot of them have been doing. There's every room for a Barney behind closed doors inside the Labour Party. There's every room for public dissent. But it has to be within certain limits, which are not zero-sum game limits. At the moment, these Blairites are basically pursuing the zero-sum game, where they win everything or they lose everything. And there's no room for that in politics. And Trotsky says, if Corbyn has a fresh mandate, he should reverse the process of the coup, announce on the hour who he will admit or reject. He won't do that. He's far too nice. Steve Neary says, let's be honest, George, we haven't had a Labour Party for over 20 years. Jeremy Corbyn is its rebirth. That's exactly the point that I've been making in the last few days, and also I hope in the last couple of hours, Steve, that Labour was already in big trouble. The Blair-Brown era lost 5 million Labour votes. 5 million votes were lost between 1997 and 2010. And hundreds of thousands of Labour members were lost. The party was nearly bankrupt. Jeremy Corbyn is the only chance that Labour has for rebirth, for rebuilding. He's already made it the biggest political party in the whole of Europe, the biggest social democratic party in the whole of the world. It has wiped out its debts. It has nearly 750,000 members, all paying quite good money actually, and wiping out the debts of a political party. Well, only a few years ago, people were almost, well, in fact, they were under arrest, but they were almost in the Old Bailey because of the desperate, dodgy manoeuvres they had to do in order to raise money for the Labour Party at all. Now Labour doesn't need to go to dodgy millionaires and billionaires and offer them something in exchange for donations. It doesn't even have to go to trade unions, although it should. It has enough members to generate a fighting fund of hitherto unimaginable proportions. So, for people to talk, as Bobby Friedman did earlier, so apocalyptically about Corbyn is just ridiculous. It is literally the opposite of the truth. Mark Burnett says, sadly, with Smith's passing, we saw the beginning of the end of the true Labour Party. Since then, it's been smoke and mirrors. Well, it has been for a long time. And Corbyn is the antidote to that. John Smith was a mighty oak, and when he fell, the reverberations in the political forest were for a short time very profound. But Labour was then hijacked by something new, qualitatively new, something called Blairism. And I'm going to be speaking in the next hour to someone, believe me, he still defines himself as a Blairite. You thought it could never happen. But a Labour councillor, a Blairite, is going to be facing me in debate in the next 60 minutes. I promise you, you don't want to miss that. I'm going to be debating with a Labour councillor who describes himself as a Blairite about Tony Blair and his decision, if decision it is, to stop making the kind of money he's been making over the last 8 years. Well, if you believe that, I've got a bridge down here in London over the Thames I'd like to sell you. The third hour is going to be just as good as the previous two. Stay tuned. Now, if you've seen my film, The Killings of Tony Blair, you'll already know what I'm going to talk to Councillor Danny Hackett about. Tony Blair's £100 million personal fortune made in just 8 years. Directly, I believe, out of the period of office that he had just vacated. But not everybody thinks like me. There are some people, rare as hen's teeth, who still describe themselves as Blairite. And fewer still who are prepared to come on the radio with me and talk about it. Councillor Danny Hackett up next. Now, Councillor Hackett, thank you very much indeed for joining me for a discussion about Tony Blair's announcement this week that he was closing down his money-making ventures and was henceforth to be regarded as a charitable paragon of virtue. Now, I heard a band playing somewhere, believe it if you like. You persuade us, will you, that the rake's progress of the last 8 years is now coming to an end?
Hi, George. Good to be on tonight. I think that when Tony Blair left office, he had every right to set up any organisation he wanted. He was a private citizen again. He served our country well, and it just proves what a genuine and kind-hearted man Tony really is. That now he's focusing more of his work, more of his effort on non-profit work, where he'll be able to help even more of the world's most needy.
So that's what it's been about, helping the world's most needy. Well, let's focus on one or two of the examples. He earned millions of pounds from the dictator of Kazakhstan, who shoots down miners when they go on strike. Indeed, he advised the dictator of Kazakhstan how to spin the mass murder of striking miners in Kazakhstan. Was that out of kind-heartedness, or was it the millions?
Well, to be honest, George, I think you're completely misinterpreting the facts there, and you're actually telling a mistruth. I think that there's a lot more of a complex deal that was going on there. Tony Blair and his organisation were clearly providing some sort of PR support, some sort of advisory support to that government. And I think, in this day and age, that's perfectly fine. And I think, if someone's willing to pay for a service, and someone as qualified as Tony Blair in that role is able to, make the world a safer place and, turn, what only one could describe as, horrible atrocities around, then I think that's a good thing.
Okay, the dictator of Kuwait gave Tony Blair £27 million for advice. Now, in Kuwait, there is no democracy or liberty or freedom of any kind. Political dissent is likely to land you in the torture chambers, if not in the graveyard. £27 million, this kind-hearted man of your imagination received from the unelected despot who runs Kuwait. Again, I ask you, was it out of kind-heartedness or was it the 27 million?
Well, I think that, quite clearly we saw from Mr. Blair's time in office that he has a very wide view in terms of the world. And I think that, obviously I didn't speak on his behalf. This is what, I interpret from my readings and my knowledge, is that actually, that work has been undertaken in order to create the world that we live in a safer place. Now, quite clearly, Mr. Blair can't do that work for free. He hasn't got an unlimited supply of income, of wealth to be able to, do this work for free. There has to be some sort of service level, and I think if we're achieving. If we're on the road to achieving peace and actually ridding the world of these evil...
But it's nothing to do with peace. It wasn't. He wasn't getting millions from the Kazakh leaders or the Kuwaiti, and tens of millions, by the way, tens of millions, from the Kuwaiti despots for anything to do with peace. You're confused, Danny.
I would completely disagree. I think that, in terms of what Tony Blair was doing there was, in actual fact, with a wider view to bring peace to the region, to stabilise the region, and actually, it's not always,
But Danny, even he doesn't claim that, son. I mean, what I've heard of being more royal than the king, more Catholic than the Pope, but even Tony Blair doesn't pretend that the earnings from these despotisms are about making peace. They're about making money.
Well, I don't think Tony Blair's ever gone on record or at any time in over the past 8, 7, 9 years and said, I'm doing this to make money. He's doing it because...
he got £1 million for 2 hours' work in Claridge's Hotel on behalf of JP Morgan, the multinational bank, for helping to broker a merger between two of the world's biggest companies. 1 million for 2 hours. That had nothing to do with peace. That was about making money.
Well, do you think that let me put a question to you, George. If you were offered £1 million to use your skill set, and you were told it would take 2 hours work, and you also cared deeply about the work that you were doing, would you do it?
I would, but I wouldn't expect you to come on the radio and pretend it had anything to do with making peace.
I think the wider objective is peace. Quite clearly we saw, through the new Labour foreign policy when the Labour Party was in government, that, Tony Blair had a world view. It was about creating peace. It was about creating a more stable world.
Danny, now I know you're having a laugh. Tony Blair spread war. I'm just looking up at the screen now. The Middle East is in absolute ruins, in flames. The blood is running down the streets. So if that's what he was about, making peace, well, it didn't work, did it?
Well, everlasting peace. Well, clearly that takes a longer time. It comes as no surprise to you, George, that I don't disagree with the war in Iraq.
Why do you just avoid the news then? Do you avoid the news about what's happening in Iraq, what's happening in Syria, what's happening with ISIS and Al-Qaeda?
Well, quite clearly, any death, no matter what country you're from, what religion you are, is absolutely needless. And I think that's something that is probably the only thing that we would agree on tonight. But I think that actually there's a bigger thing to be said here, and it's that Tony Blair started that process. We removed the evil dictator Saddam Hussein, who was murdering and butchering his people. I don't necessarily agree with the run up to war. I think there's stuff that could have been done differently. But I think that we can't regret that war now. It was done with the best of intentions. It happened, and now we should be playing a bigger part in the region to stabilise that, to rid the world of ISIS.
But again, Danny, you're being more royal than the king. The United States President has explicitly stated, he's in my film, you can see his lips moving, has explicitly stated that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are direct outgrowths of the British and American invasion and occupation of Iraq. He says so. Is he wrong?
I think it's more. It's quite clearly, George. You could put a link there, and you could start to draw that comparison. I wouldn't say that Mr. Obama is completely wrong. No, I think there is some sort of connection there, but that's mainly because and this is something I disagree with Tony Blair on, is that I thought the road to war was wrong, and two, the aftermath was wrong, and so there was no plan, and that's something that he's openly admitted himself. And said that, if we could have got the plan better after, then we could have left a better, more stable Iraq.
Okay, what about Chilcot? Was he wrong?
Well, the Chilcot report obviously found that Tony Blair hadn't lied to the nation. I think lots of people in the same position as yourself, were very, were waiting with bated breath when that Chilcot report was due to come out, because they were waiting for Tony Blair, to be locked up by the Met Police and driven off to The Hague. Quite clearly, that's not happened. It's not going to happen. The Chilcot report brought out some really interesting facts. It brought out some really interesting new bits of news that we hadn't seen. I've not read the whole thing. I've read a large part of the executive summary, but I think the Chilcot report only went to prove that actually Tony Blair hadn't willingly misled this nation, and it was with the best of intentions.
Well, you must have read a different Chilcot report then to everybody else, because you're the only man, including again Blair, who pretends that the Chilcot report somehow exonerated your hero Tony Blair. It damned him. It damned him and denounced him, said the war was unnecessary, said that it was fought on a false pretense. It has provided the evidence that will lead to hundreds of legal cases from the bereaved families of the British servicemen that were sent ill-clad, ill-armed, ill-prepared for a war that didn't have to be fought. Did you miss all that in the Chilcot inquiry?
Do you know what, George? I think it's a great opportunity now, because I think, what was damaging to the British troops, to British families, and to people who lost sons and daughters in Iraq was that you obviously went and met Mr. Hussein and you said, "Sir, we salute your courage, your strength, and your indefatigability." So that's what I think was a disgrace. Well, I don't think what Tony Blair done was a disgrace whatsoever.
That's not, but oddly, Danny, that's not what any of the families are saying. That's none of them. None of the bereaved families are saying that what killed their son was something I said in 1994 in Baghdad. What they are actually saying, and we'll soon be saying it in court with your hero in the dock, is that you killed my son. You sent him to a war that didn't have to be fought, which Chilcot confirms. You sent him to a war ill-clad, ill-armed, ill-prepared because of decisions that you, Tony Blair, made. That's what the families are saying. None of them, I promise you, zero, none of them have anything to say about me. If it was up to me, their sons would all still be alive. Their sons are dead now because your hero sent them to a war on a perspective that turned out to be false.
Of course, and obviously everyone in this country regrets, not least Tony Blair regrets any life that was lost, whether it be British...
How do you know he regrets? Have you ever met Tony Blair?
Many times, George, many times.
So are you a spokesman for him here tonight?
No, I'm not a spokesperson for him. I don't speak on his behalf. But what I'm telling you is, quite clearly, if you'd watched... people always talk about Tony Blair, the spin doctor, and the, Teflon, it never sticks, etc. But, if you watch that speech he made after the Chilcot inquiry report was released, there was quite clearly emotion there. Even in the Chilcot inquiry, there was quite clearly emotion there. No man, woman or child on this planet, I think, goes to bed actually thinking, "Oh yeah, that's great, we've had some deaths this week." Of course it doesn't. It must eat the man alive. And I wouldn't want to be in his position whatsoever.
So you concede that what happened must be eating him alive, and you think that he was paid £100 million and went from having no houses to having 34 houses.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with, I believe in, George, aspirational socialism.
Now, aspirational socialism, where you make £100 million in 8 years and you get 34 houses. Councillor Danny Hackett, the aspirational socialist, thanks for joining us. Moira tweets, "I was a member of the Labour Party for 2 weeks. I left the day they took their own members to court." Well, Moira, you oughtn't to have done so, because that's what they want you to do. I was a member for 36 years and I spent thousands of pounds trying to stop them expelling me. And I'm fully expecting reinstatement along with all those that were purged in the Blair era. Andy's on the line, wants to defend Tony Blair. Andy, you're welcome. Go ahead.
Hi, George. How are you?
I'm good. The better for hearing from you. Go on.
Yeah, okay, George. First time calling. I don't know if you know. Anyways, George, I think you're completely wrong about Tony Blair. I think he was the best prime minister of the last half a century.
Oh, yeah? Not many people agree with you. Tell us how.
He tripled. Okay, I'll give you several reasons. Firstly, he tripled the amount of money we spend as a country on the NHS. If New Labour hadn't have been elected, the NHS would have been privatised by now. Do you agree?
I don't. I disagree with both of those, so go on.
I do. The NHS was on its knees in 1997 because John Major had backbenchers who were disinterested in increasing investment on the NHS. But Tony Blair reduced waiting times and they poured significant resources into the NHS. You should know you voted on a lot of these bills.
I know everything that you know, Andy, and much more. Don't imagine for 1 minute that you know anything I don't know.
No, I'm not saying you don't know, but I'm saying let's acknowledge the facts.
Have you ever heard...
Well,
most of the expenditure that Tony Blair made on the NHS was private finance initiative and public-private partnership.
And even if it was...
Well, never mind even if it was, because that's why the public services are now sinking under hundreds of millions of pounds worth of debt.
No, you bring this point up quite a lot, George. Tony Blair made a decision. He realised that they didn't have the resources as of the date to build new hospitals, so he decided to tap it. You don't take into account the benefit of using state-of-the-art hospitals.
You know that PFI... You do know, Andy, you do know that PFI is now widely, including by Blairites, regarded as having been an historic mistake. You do know that, do you? Or are you another more Catholic than the Pope guy?
I'm not more Catholic than the Pope, but I grew up as a child in the New Labour years.
But nobody is defending PFI now, Andy.
No.
Only you.
Yes, I do defend PFI. It was
but nobody else does.
Made with honest intentions.
But nobody else... No, here we're back to the honest intention. You kill 1 million people, but your intentions were honest.
Listen,
you introduce PFI, you destroy the NHS, you destroy the education system, but it was honest intentions.
Under which estimates were 1 million people killed, George? That's simply incorrect. It was 250,000. Please get your facts correct.
Oh, so you're lecturing me about facts? About Iraq? Are you serious?
I'm not lecturing you, but that's simply incorrect.
Don't try and correct me.
1 million people have died.
1 million people have died as a direct result of Blair and Bush's invasion of Iraq. Again, you're the last man standing defending PFI when even the people who introduced it now admit that it was a mistake and denying the dead bodies in Iraq.
Elected again. People like you, George.
What?
People like you will ensure Labour will never be elected again, and they'll never be able to provide the progressive change this country needs.
But there was no progressive change. You killed 1 million people.
EMA.
You killed
several steps. How can you deny that, George? You're in denial.
You killed 1 million people. You bankrupted the NHS and our education system.
They didn't.
You destroyed the economy. You sold the gold. You bankrupted the country.
How many new skills were built? Answer my question, please. How many new skills were built under the New Labour's program for building new schools?
By PFI?
How many children had a better education? Several hundred.
Listen, the only way this is going to work is if we listen to each other, okay?
Okay, then, go ahead.
Now, you sold the gold, you deregulated the banks went over the cliff and destroyed the entire economy. Your PFI is now regarded by every financial authority, from the Financial Times to the former Chief Secretary of the Treasury, as having been a mistake. Chilcot has damned your war in Iraq. The United Nations has damned it. The million figure... The million figure comes from the United Nations. 1 million dead. You did all that, and you lost 5 million votes and half of the Labour Party's membership.
I knew you'd bring that up. I can't wait to... Okay, can I speak now?
Yeah.
Okay, number one, with respect to the 5 million votes, how many... How many votes did Labour gain from 1992 to 1997? Labour has never been in government for 13 years. I don't know why you never acknowledge this fact. Tony Blair is a historic leader when it comes to success. When it's a left-wing leader, what happened the last time we had a left-wing leader? I'll leave that for you to answer after I finish. Secondly, you bring up this 1 million people that died. It took the best part of 3 weeks to invade Iraq. And yes, I admit there were several issues. I didn't agree with the war. You keep talking as if I agreed with the war.
Don't tell me that. You're a liar. You're a liar. You did not disagree with the war. Nobody could speak in defence of what happened in the way that you're speaking. That was against the war. You're a liar. You're a liar.
Let me explain my perspective. Listen, I'm a 19-year-old child.
You're 19.
Europe.
You're 19.
Yes, I'm 19. Yes,
right, get off the air because I'll be charged. I'll be charged with beating up a minor. Get off the air. I've heard enough. I'm going to Damien in Brighton.
Good evening, George.
Good evening.
George, I think it's fair to say that there are very few certainties in politics. But there is one certainty, and that is if MPs consistently brief against and attack their own party, then that party is guaranteed to lose a general election.
Well, there's no doubt about that. I mean, you can say that you disagree with this policy or that policy, but if you're telling people the guy who is going to be trying to be Prime Minister is all the things they've said about him, you're telling people not to vote Labour.
Exactly, George. And I mean, by briefing against the Labour Party, people like John McTernan, Alistair Campbell, and their fellow plotters within the PLP are obviously causing the very outcome that they claim that they want to prevent. So the thing I've noticed, and it's been sort of gearing up a bit over the last couple of weeks, George, is the hysterical language and increasingly aggressive language we've been hearing from the right wing of the Labour Party. So I think it would be a good time to just take a breath, step back and actually look at what the problems that Jeremy Corbyn has identified in the country and the solutions he's offering. Now, we were talking last week about how the neoliberal consensus that we've had, which links into the corruption issue, about corporate interests influencing our MPs and our Parliament. And we talked about the neoliberal consensus, which is focused on rolling back the state and how they're doing that through policies like privatisation, austerity and deregulation. And we established the outcomes of those policies. So we had the 2008 economic crisis. We've got the national debt, which has increased to over £1.5 trillion in the last 6 years. And we've also got private debt. Because of the stagnation of wages, people have been forced to borrow. So we're at a record level of £1.44 trillion. So we've seen the effects of neoliberal policy over the last 35 years. And now, those are manifestations of the policy, George, but there's actually a key flaw in the model. And that key flaw is that before we had the neoliberal policy in the post-war period, we had a functioning mixed economy. So that's where you've got the state and the economy working together. Now, we had increased living standards and wages throughout that whole period. And so what I would argue is what these policies and this obsession with rolling back the state have done is they've caused an imbalance to the mixed economy. So I think in the final analysis, Jeremy Corbyn's offer, which to me appears to be very moderate and rational, is to ratchet back the neoliberal model and return to the mixed economy. And I think I'd argue that restoring that balance is not only essential to the security of the economy and the country, but it's the right thing to do.
It's common sense, and as a matter of fact, if you're lining it up on a spectrum, Jeremy Corbyn's programme is not nearly as left-wing as Clement Attlee's was in 1945. Got to go, Damien, for a break. Thanks. Now we've had a 19-year-old Blairite on the air. We even had a 13-year-old Labour councillor and shadow cabinet member. At least I think Councillor Danny Hackett was 13. He might have been 14. What was that famous, that book? Adrian Mole, aged 13 and a half or something. Now we've got Blue Snow coming in from Liverpool. You'll remember Mark. He only reads the media when he's in jail, and he tells us every week that he's a Corbynite. But he's on the air now to defend Tony Blair. Mark, what a mass of contradictions you are.
Hello, George. You all right, mate?
I'm fine.
Hey, do you know what, George? Can I just say one thing off the cuff? You know when you're on the radio, when it comes up, all the information on the digital radio, it doesn't come up that you're on with your number,
Really?
You need to put that... No, honest, you need to put that right. All it says is what the morning show is. And it's been doing it for months. It should be coming up, George Galloway, the mother of all the talk shows, and your number.
We'll attend to that right away. On you go, Mark. Go ahead.
All right, listen now. I'm going to support Tony Blair a little bit here. Right, do you know the best thing he done? End 16 years of a Tory government. That's always forgotten, isn't it, by his critics? Think of the importance of that, George. Think
it was
of the
18 years,
importance
actually.
at the time.
It was 18 years.
Okay, 18 years then. There you go. A pivotal moment, an extraordinary moment. And okay, things got wrong. I'm with you. But let's have it right. He was the first Labour PM to come in with a massively annihilated manufacturing base. The port's absolutely nearly derelict. So, of course, he was going to turn to business to invest. And that's when things went downhill. I'm with you. Now, let's get to Iraq a minute. Now, I don't believe for 1 minute that man had any harm in his heart to do to the Iraqi people. I reckon the biggest mistake was his homework and the Americans' exit strategy. I don't believe he thought that the Iraqi people would turn on each other as quick as they did.
Oh, really?
and reject to go to a democratic vote as quick as they did.
Oh, dear. Okay, Mark. That's Mark from Liverpool. Sometimes at the pleasure of Her Majesty, who only studies when he's in prison, the British media, who claims to be a Corbynite, but that's his take on the Iraq War and on Tony Blair. Well. Here's Paul. He's on next. Go ahead, Paul.
Hey, George. Big fan. Good to speak to you.
Thank you. Which part of the country are you in?
I'm in a part of West Yorkshire.
Go ahead.
Okay, so just a couple of comments about this PLP saga, really. So I don't know if people are aware how anti-Corbyn MPs have even tried to twist the voting in the election in sort of small ways. This is minor compared to some things, but just to say that our MP is anti-Corbyn, but a lot of the party members are quite pro-Corbyn.
Okay,
and
that sounds like a problem waiting to happen.
Yeah, so when the email was sent out about becoming a registered supporter from our MP, actually it was sort of done in two parts. So the first part, the opening paragraph said, if you agree with my policies, then read below, and if not, you can delete sort of a message.
Yeah.
And then when you scroll down, so I actually disagree, but I scroll down anyway. It says you can become a registered supporter within these time periods. Register and vote for Owen Smith. So it's this thing of, my MP knows they have quite a lot of opposition, and they're just trying to exclude that within the voting, which is just, is frustrating. And then a couple of other things I had is just the media coverage this week has been, it's like it's been put on steroids.
It's been off the scale. Dispatches, Panorama, Sky News. I mean, it's off the scale. There's no longer even a pretense, never mind of impartiality, but of normal professional standards. It has all been completely abandoned.
I'd love there to be a proper research study done. I know there's one done on sort of 80% of the media being misleading or sort of actually false, but I'd love there to be a study on how it's accelerated through this leadership election, and the fact that it starts with Corbyn. He's a nice guy, but he's not a leader, and then it becomes, well, actually, he's not a nice guy.
Yeah, exactly. The same people who told us when they were resigning that he was a nice guy, but they were resigning, are now telling us he is A to Z. There is no crime or vice that he remains unaccused of, by the same people who told us when they resigned that he was a really nice guy, but. Am I right?
That's right, and the issue, it seems, is that because these things don't stick, they then move on again. So it's then become, well, they've taken it off Corbyn a bit, and now it's Momentum. Momentum are the problem, and it's a group of thugs and things. I mean, I'm part of Momentum, and I go to the meetings, and it's a lot of people, that are quite relaxed, quite, peaceful sort of characters. So it's just crazy. And then my final point was just that this idea. I was listening to a radio show the other morning, and it was a debate, and they had sort of 1 pro-Corbyn and 3 anti-Corbyn, and it was all getting a bit heated. And just the way the branding around this thing of everyone being Trotsky is just unbelievable. I mean, people can self-identify as a Blairite, but they're not allowed to be called Blairites now, or you can be kicked out of the party.
No, the Blairites banned the use of the term Blairite as being a term of abuse. So you couldn't actually make it up. But here, Paul, look at this. Look at this situation where the man's first wife, who he was married to when he was 25, he's now 67, with whom he has no children. He was married to her when he was 25. That is, therefore, more than 50 years ago. Almost 50 years ago, says that she wouldn't vote for him. Do you know any man whose first wife would vote for them?
Well, no. And I mean, with these headlines, people should look at that and it should immediately attract. And I think it is. I think that's the positive. But the thing with the Trotsky, and you've said it before, there's never been more than 6,000 in the country. But then they come up with this argument of, well, they prey on all these impressionable people, and they create this attitude of anyone that is pro-Corbyn is stupid because they're being influenced by these people. And it's just like, a lot of us had the foresight to say we don't want to go to war in Iraq. Do you know what I mean? We're not that
well, we
stupid,
knew more than the experts. We knew more than the experts. Paul, thanks for your call in Yorkshire. We've had 19-year-old Blairite. It turns out that Councillor Danny is 14 and a half. We've had the only Blairite in Liverpool, Mark, certainly the only Blairite in the HMP system, which is where he does most of his studying, he told us. Let's see what Alex in Milton Keynes has to say. Go ahead, Alex.
Hello, George.
Hi.
Oh. Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
I cannot stand the man.
Tell me why.
Well, personally, his views, 1970s, early 80s, he has no recognition in this day and age.
Tell us which
Times
views.
Have changed. Times have changed.
Give me examples, Alex. Which views are so beached in the 1970s that no one would support them? Give me an example.
Well, it's very, very difficult because...
No, it should be very, very easy. You phoned a national radio station to say that you can't stand the man because his views are very 1970s. But when I ask you to give me an example, you say it's very, very difficult.
Well, can I say... I'll put it this way. I heard you earlier talking about when it came down to the police and the military. You mentioned about he's pro-military, didn't you?
I said I was.
Okay, so can you tell me where Mr. Corbyn stands on military issues or police issues?
No, look, you called up to say that his views... What you're not doing is giving me an example of any of the views that you dislike. Okay.
I will give you an example, George, please. I'll give you an example.
Please.
Number one, police force. He doesn't want any police officers carrying tasers. He wants to ban tasers.
It's completely untrue.
No, it's not. It's not.
It's completely untrue.
No, it's not.
Alex, you'll need to get off the radio because this is an abuse of process. You phone up here to say that you're against all of his policies, which you describe as 1970s and 80s. You're incapable of giving me an example, and the example you give me is false. Ellie tweets, Corbyn also needs to sort out Scottish Labour. I'm worried we will be left to suffer with Kezia in charge. I'm not sure how much longer she'll be in charge. If I'm reinstated into the Labour Party, most of my work will be in Scotland. David in Northampton, he wants a licence fee referendum. I'm up for that. David, go ahead. David, are you there?
You were speaking about the BBC earlier, and they're such an enormous organisation. I don't know whether politics makes any difference anymore because they seem to be controlling everything.
Well, they don't control everything. Of course, there is ITV, there is Sky. Both of those are doing much better, actually. And the BBC is not any longer driving the political agenda on its own. But it has, unlike the other two, the benefit that we have no alternative but to pay for it, whether we like it or not, whether we ever watch it or not. If we have a television, we must pay. And we must pay big salaries to an organisation that is utterly dysfunctional, in some respects corrupted, and in politics completely beyond the pale. And I refuse to do it.
Yes, I don't blame you. And an awful lot of politicians, when they finish in politics, do join the BBC. I think even Owen... I think he worked for the BBC as well.
He did before he went into Parliament, before he became a Viagra salesman. Stand up for Owen Smith. David, I'm pressing on just because of the hour. Your referendum idea, tell me about it.
Well, I just think, you've won one referendum. I don't know where we would go about it, but I think that people should be given a choice whether they should have the BBC or not.
Well, I don't know if we'll get a referendum on it, or even if we ought. But
is it the era of the referendum?
But I'm good at referendums.
Yeah.
I've won 2 referendums in the last 2 years. So I wouldn't shirk from that referendum, or shrink from it, to be, I should say. But I do think a national discussion needs to take place about whether we are going to agree to continue to fund something that is politically beyond the pale, which has cast away all, even professional standards, never mind a pretense at impartiality. And I don't pay. I refuse to pay.
Right.
I won't pay. And
I haven't got a television either.
No, I
would like to have a television, but I refuse to pay that licence fee.
Well, get on your computer. You can often find good things to watch. That's what I do. David in Northamptonshire, thanks very much. Let's go to Ripon in Hackney. Go ahead, Ripon.
Hi. Firstly, my phone charge is low, so if I disappear, that's the reason. So I'll get straight on with it. I wanted to raise 2 issues. One is a criticism of Corbyn, because it seems to me that he seems to be making a big tactical blunder in this sense, which is that the only hope for the future, I think, is if increasing people tune out of the BBC and into other things like YouTube. Because ideally the BBC has to fizzle out in influence. But every week at PMQ, for example, and in lots of other places, I don't see Corbyn or McDonnell actively directing people to alternative outlets like web pages or YouTube things. So that seems to me a big tactical blunder. I don't know why they're not pushing that more. And the other thing I want to raise is a vote of confidence. Now, on the surface, it's quite reasonable for people to hold a vote of confidence, because that's just a public expression of how people feel. So in principle, there was nothing. I don't see that there was anything wrong with holding a vote of confidence in Corbyn. But then, by the same logic, wouldn't it be perfectly reasonable for CLPs to make a public expression like that about how they feel about their MP?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is one of the giant contradictions. The people who are never done telling us that facing reselection would be a fate worse than death for them and worse for the country, when they have been trying for an entire year to reselect their own leader. If it's good for the goose, why isn't it good for the gander?
And what do you think about, in my eyes, Corbyn McDonnell's failure in directing people away from mainstream media?
Well, I think that process is already happening. talkRADIO, for example, is a new kid on the block. A lot of people are turning to it because they have no faith in the alternatives. I'm big on social media myself and have been for some years. There's nobody on the left got anything like the reach on social media that I do. More than 1 million people follow me on social media. I've got 50,000 videos on YouTube, 100 million views on YouTube. Nobody on the left ever has come anything like to these kind of levels. So I'm with you on that, but I don't think you can expect Jeremy Corbyn to be directing people from one media to another, from one station to another. This is our responsibility to surf, to go looking for information, to go looking for the truth. That's what I do. I watch Sky. I almost never watch BBC. I watch Sky and I watch RT. I'm getting two very dramatically different perspectives on the same events. I know which one I prefer. Other people might prefer differently to me. But at least I'm getting two sources of information. And that's the future. And that's the future that many millions of people are already in, Ripon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for your call. Janice Barnes, talking about the corruption at Westminster, corrupt and rotten to the core. No wonder MPs are panicking. And Spam Fritters, what a wonderful Twitter name, says it's worse than that, GG. He cares about those who lack money. That's the key. That's Jeremy she's talking about. York's Lass says it's the boss who promotes employees. Jeremy Corbyn is boss, not MPs who should choose the front bench. No, I mean either the leader of the party should choose the front bench, and he should do so judicially with an aim to creating a broad church, or the members need to vote for the front bench. Ford says, I've always heard people say some MPs were bent, but I didn't realise it was that bad. Trust me, it's bad. Dr. Owl says, if you don't believe Corbyn has the right to get on with his job, you don't believe in democracy. It's that simple. David Beckham for PM says, in the City of London you have the financial district, and round Parliament you have the corrupt district. Actually, both of them are corrupt. Ford again says, after hearing what Martin Williams said in his book, Parliament Limited, I'm definitely going to back Jeremy Corbyn. Charles Chip says, when Corbyn is announced leader tomorrow, do you think there will be a split? No, I don't. I think there are people who want to continue the war, but they don't have the courage to actually leave the Labour Party because they know that they wouldn't be elected as John Doe independent. I'm the only person that gets elected outside of the party political system. None of them could and would never, ever dare to try it. Paul Register says, I don't like the term political class. Reminds me of officer class in Sharp novels. It's anti-working class. And someone texts, still happening. Hi George, organisation, discussion and active participation is the solution for people who share the sentiments of James, one of your previous callers. Jeremy Corbyn is a standard around which people can discuss and articulate those sentiments and organise. Now that was a text because it's too long to be a tweet. Now let me tell you, I used to rail against this restriction of 140 characters. But I've become, I think, pretty good at expressing the most powerful points in just 140 characters. And let me tell you that a very wise speaker that I respected very much, the late Lord Wetherell, Bernard Wetherell, I once complained to him about being restricted to 10-minute speeches. He reminded me of Mr. Churchill's great wisdom when one night he said, I apologise for making such a long speech. I didn't have time to prepare a short one. A short speech, a short tweet, a short statement has much more impact. Well, that's it, I think. If the people next door give me the cue, I'm out of here. It's been marvellous, I think. It's been a remarkable show. Much more remarkable than any other I've done because, well, my enemies turned up to argue the point, and I'm grateful to them. Even if they were only 13 or 14, it was good that they had the courage to come and argue the points that they believed in. If everybody did that, if Owen Smith had had the courage to do that, we wouldn't have been looking for Wally all this time. Wally's history after 12 o'clock tomorrow, trust me, you will virtually never hear from him again. As for the big ugly bear, I expect you're going to be hearing a lot about him over the next period. It's been the mother of all talk shows. Thanks for joining me.